In the distant centuries of medieval Europe, life moved slowly, not just because of the lack of machines or modern convenience, but because the rhythm of the world was ruled by tradition, by the seasons, and by silence. Each sunrise carried familiar sounds, the creak of wooden doors, the echo of a church bell, the rustle of wool skirts against damp earth. It was a time when the simplest acts, a greeting, a glance, a touch, could carry meanings far heavier than words. Love in this world was not spoken of freely. It did not dance through letters or flourish in public like the stories told in later ages. It lived quietly, behind the stillness of the eyes and the hush of the night. And when it appeared too soon, before vows were exchanged and families approved, it was not seen as something tender or beautiful. It was seen as a shadow, a quiet rebellion against the order that society tried so hard to protect. For most women in medieval Europe, life followed a narrow path. From childhood, their futures were planned not by desire, but by necessity. Marriage was an arrangement, a promise made between families, often long before love had the chance to bloom. The meaning of union was more practical than personal. It joined lands, secured peace, strengthened alliances. And in that tightly woven system, affection was a luxury very few could afford. Yet, even in a world of rules, the human heart remained unpredictable. It did not bend to custom or caution. It beat quietly behind veils and linen gowns, finding warmth in fleeting moments. Perhaps a young woman working in the fields would exchange shy smiles with a man who passed her each morning. Perhaps they met only in glances, never in words. But in that glance lay danger, for affection could become scandal, and a simple bond of emotion could undo a family's honor. To understand why, one must understand the fabric of medieval life. Society was built upon faith, and faith upon fear, the fear of sin, of judgment, and of shame. The Church held not only the keys to salvation, but also the power to define right and wrong in every aspect of daily life. What it blessed was holy, what it condemned was ruin. The pulpit's voice reached every ear, reminding all that virtue was the highest treasure a woman could possess, and that losing it outside of marriage meant losing her place in the world. In that world, reputation was not just a matter of gossip, it was survival. For a woman, her name, her honor, and her family's respect were one and the same. A whisper could destroy what years of devotion had built. To be thought improper was enough to close doors, to turn neighbors into strangers, to draw pity and disdain in equal measure. Love, therefore, had to hide. It lived in shadows, disguised by politeness, protected by silence. But even among the strictest communities, life was full of contradictions. The Church preached purity, yet ballads and poems spoke of longing. Minstrels sang of kings who fell in love with maidens, of ladies who waited by candlelight. These tales offered comfort. They made emotion feel noble, even when reality was far less forgiving. Behind every melody, there was a quiet truth, that love, no matter how forbidden, still found its way into human hearts. In the small villages scattered across Europe, daily life was hard. Most people lived by the rhythm of toil and prayer. Days began before dawn and ended by the dim light of oil lamps. Yet in the stillness of those nights, emotions stirred, subtle, unspoken, and deeply human. Young women dreamed of futures that belonged to them alone, not to their fathers or the Church. They longed for companionship, for warmth, for someone to see them not as daughters or servants, but simply as themselves. And sometimes that longing became a quiet act of defiance, a choice made not for rebellion's sake, but for the simple need to feel alive. Still, the cost of such a choice could be unbearable. A woman who loved before she was allowed to love risked everything: her reputation, her safety, her family's trust. Even if her feelings were honest and true, society saw them as a stain upon virtue. Love was meant to follow marriage, not precede it. And when that order was broken, even unintentionally, the punishment was often isolation, not from law, but from community. To be judged by the people one grew up with was a deep wound. Neighbors who once smiled would look away. Families might send their daughters elsewhere, to convents or distant relatives, to hide the gossip that clung like smoke. For the woman herself, there was rarely a voice to defend her. Her story, if remembered at all, was told by others, shaped by shame, stripped of compassion. And yet, through all this silence, there existed a quiet resilience. These women did not vanish from history because they were weak. They endured because they had to. They carried their burdens with dignity, their love buried deep in the corners of memory. The medieval world gave them few choices, but within those limits, they still found ways to live, to care, and sometimes to forgive themselves. When we speak of them today, we are not reopening wounds. We are giving names to forgotten lives. We are acknowledging that love in all ages has never been simple. It has always asked for courage. In the Middle Ages, that courage often went unnoticed, hidden beneath the surface of obedience and silence. So tonight, as you listen, imagine the distant hum of that ancient world, the slow ringing of bells over a gray morning, the murmurs of villagers gathered outside a church, the whisper of a woman's prayer in the dark, asking not for glory, but for understanding. She is the voice behind this story, not famous, not powerful, but real. Her life may have been ruled by custom, but her heart belonged to herself. And though her story was marked by struggle, it was also marked by strength, the kind that blooms quietly in the coldest seasons. This is her story. This is the story of many like her. And through these chapters, we will walk gently beside them, learning not just about their suffering, but about their courage, their endurance, and the quiet humanity that history so often forgets. To understand the women who lived and loved in medieval Europe, we must first understand the world that surrounded them. A world built on hierarchy, faith, and the unspoken promise that everyone must know their place. It was a world where the line between duty and desire was drawn not in sand, but in stone. Medieval society was a carefully woven tapestry. Each thread, peasant, noble, priest, or merchant, had a purpose, and that purpose rarely changed. From the moment of birth, one's destiny was largely decided. A farmer's son would till the land his father worked, and a daughter would learn the quiet labors of home. A noble child would inherit not freedom, but responsibility, to manage estates, guard honor, and serve the church or the crown. Above all, the idea of order was sacred. Every life was arranged beneath God's great chain of being. The belief that heaven itself had designed the ranks of creation. At the top stood kings and lords, believed to rule by divine will. Beneath them were knights, bound by oaths of loyalty and service. Below them, the villagers, craftsmen, and laborers whose toil fed the realm. And far beneath, those forgotten by fortune, the poor, the wandering, and the widowed. In such a world, a person's position was not just social, but spiritual. To accept one's place was to accept God's plan. To question it was to challenge the natural order of existence. And yet, within this rigid structure, life was full of contradictions, of kindness and cruelty, hope and despair. For women, the rules were even more defined. From birth, their path was bound by expectation. They were daughters, first, expected to serve their families, wives next, expected to serve their husbands, and mothers after, expected to raise children in obedience and faith. Very few could escape this cycle, and even fewer wished to. The security of belonging, of fulfilling a role that everyone understood, brought a kind of quiet peace, even when it limited freedom. In villages scattered across Europe, a woman's daily life was marked with rhythm and repetition. She rose with the dawn, kindled the fire, baked bread, milked animals, and tended to small gardens. Her work never ended, and yet it was rarely acknowledged as labor. Within stone cottages or wooden huts, she carried the weight of survival, the warmth of the hearth, the care of children, the tending of the sick. In her hands rested the pulse of the household. But her worth, in the eyes of the world, was measured differently. It was judged by her obedience, her modesty, and the reputation she brought to her family. The church's teachings painted womanhood as both sacred and fragile, pure when virtuous, dangerous when tempted. The story of Eve, told from every pulpit, reminded believers that a woman's choices could shape the fate of all mankind. And so fear and reverence blended into one. A woman was both honored and confined by her own symbolism. For noble women, life looked different but felt the same. Their walls were made of stone, not timber, but their duties were similar: to preserve honor, maintain households, and secure alliances through marriage. They might wear fine fabrics and learn to read, but they too lived under constant watch. Their lives were political, their emotions secondary. In the cold halls of castles, they embroidered tapestries and listened to songs of courtly love, tales that spoke of knights and secret devotion, stories that offered what reality rarely could. Men too lived under rules, though theirs allowed more movement, more mistakes forgiven. A man's worth was tied to his work, his skill, or his courage, but a woman's worth was tied to her virtue. One was judged by actions, the other by appearance. And this quiet imbalance was not questioned. It was taught as truth, accepted as destiny. The church stood at the center of all understanding. Every village had its priest, every town its chapel, and every heart its fear of divine judgment. Sermons spoke not only of salvation, but of conduct, how to speak, how to dress, how to behave. Even the smallest action could carry spiritual meaning. The church did not simply preach morality, it defined identity. To step outside its guidance was to risk not only social scorn, but eternal consequence. Yet, not all was harsh. Faith also gave comfort. The same prayers that confined also offered peace. And the stillness of early morning mass and the soft glow of candlelight, people found connection to God, to community, and to one another. For women especially, faith could be both burden and refuge. It was the structure that restricted them, but also the space where they could be heard. Within convents, some found learning, purpose, and a rare independence from marriage. Still, the vast majority lived under the weight of expectation. Every decision, from what to wear to whom to marry, was bound by family and faith. And though most accepted these boundaries as natural, they still felt the pull of something deeper. The quiet wish to choose for themselves. That wish, however faint, echoed across generations. Community, too, played a powerful role. In small medieval villages, privacy was a luxury no one possessed. Everyone knew each other's stories. A single rumor could spread faster than the wind across open fields. And in a world where reputation was life itself, gossip was more powerful than law. To be respected was safety. To be doubted was ruin. Because of this, people learned to watch themselves carefully, to speak gently, to behave modestly, to hide emotions that might draw unwanted attention. Even happiness had to fit within the boundaries of propriety. Too much laughter, too much freedom could invite suspicion. Life, for many, was not about expression, but endurance. When love entered such a world, it did not enter freely. It slipped quietly between the spaces of duty and silence. A glance at a festival, a kind word at a well, a shared smile during harvest. These small moments carried more weight than love letters ever could. For the young, especially women, affection was something both longed for and feared. It was a gift that could become a curse if discovered too soon. To love before marriage was not only a moral offense in the eyes of the church, it was a social risk. It threatened the fragile balance of the community. Families feared the loss of alliances, the stain of dishonor, the judgment of neighbors. And so feelings were buried deep, carried quietly through life, whispered only in prayer. As we look back now, centuries later, it is easy to think of this world as cruel or distant, but for those who lived within it, it was simply life. These rules gave shape to their days, their beliefs, and their sense of belonging. Within those limits, they found moments of beauty, the warmth of family, the joy of harvest, the stillness of worship. And within those same limits, they struggled with the same desires we know today: to be seen, to be loved, and to be free. The medieval world may seem silent, but it was full of emotion, hidden beneath layers of duty and devotion. Its people were not heartless. They were human, bound by a system they believed unchangeable. And among them lived countless women whose quiet endurance carried the weight of generations. Their world was strict, yes, but within it, it flickered moments of tenderness, brief, fragile, and utterly human. These moments are what this story remembers. In the medieval world, love was both treasured and feared. It was praised in poems, sung in castles, and whispered about in villages. Yet in everyday life, it was something that needed control. To love before marriage was to step outside the invisible line that held society together. It was to listen to the heart when the world demanded obedience. But before we can understand what love meant, we must remember what marriage itself was. Not a matter of romance, but of arrangement. For most of medieval Europe, marriage was an agreement between families, not individuals. It joined lands, secured wealth, and bound alliances in a world where survival depended on unity. A daughter's marriage was her family's future. A son's wife was part of the family's strategy. The idea of choosing one's partner for affection was in most cases a luxury only found in stories.
Yet, stories mattered deeply. Across castles and cottages alike, songs of courtly love drifted through the air. Tales of knights who adored noble ladies, of devotion so pure it existed without touch, of love so spiritual it was almost divine. These songs filled the cold halls of stone with warmth, giving voice to feelings that daily life suppressed. For many, they offered a dream, a momentary escape from the weight of duty. In these songs, love was something holy, even when forbidden. It was the force that inspired courage, loyalty, and poetry. But outside of the ballads, the rules of the real world were unyielding. In the eyes of the church and community, love was meant to follow marriage, not precede it. Emotion without structure was seen as temptation, a test of virtue, a threat to order. Still, the heart rarely obeys instruction. In small villages and great manors alike, real people felt what songs only hinted at. Love grew quietly, hidden behind routine. A glance shared across the marketplace, a smile exchanged during harvest, a whispered prayer for someone unseen. These were the moments when love took root. It did not announce itself with grandeur. It appeared softly, like morning mist rising from the fields. For women, these emotions carried both beauty and danger. A noblewoman, locked in a world of ceremony, might find her heart stirred by a man of lower rank, a soldier, a scholar, a musician. She knew such feelings could never be acted upon. Her family's honor stood above her own happiness. A village girl, too, might dream of someone she could not have. perhaps a man promised to another, or someone far above her station. And yet in those quiet dreams, she found humanity, warmth, and hope. To feel deeply in such a time was both a gift and a burden. There were no words for private love in public life. There were no letters, no open confessions. Emotions were carried silently, like a secret prayer. The simplest kindness, a gesture, a greeting, could fill a lifetime's memory. But to act upon that love, to give it form before marriage, meant facing the full weight of social judgment. Families saw love not as an individual's choice, but as a shared responsibility. Parents arranged matches with care, considering wealth, property, faith, and reputation. When a marriage was proposed, both families stood to gain or lose. A daughter's feelings were rarely asked. Her duty was to accept. To decline a marriage was to defy not only parents, but society itself. And yet, hidden beneath that obedience, there were always quiet moments of rebellion, small, fragile hopes that perhaps love and duty might one day meet. Among peasants, things were sometimes simpler, yet just as bound by rule. A farmer's daughter might marry within her village, often someone she had known all her life. Love could grow naturally from familiarity, from shared work, shared laughter, and shared survival. But even here, expectations remained firm. Premarital affection was frowned upon, not only by priests, but by neighbors. The entire community watched closely, guarding its moral boundaries as carefully as its crops. The Church's teachings defined what love should be. It spoke of pure affection, love that reflected divine order, bound by faith and chastity. Anything outside that ideal was seen as temptation, something to be confessed and repented for. But priests and preachers were human too, and many understood that love, however imperfect, was part of human nature. Sermons warned against sin, but they also spoke of forgiveness, of compassion, of mercy. For the young, however, the fear of shame was powerful. To be discovered in affection before marriage could mean disgrace, not only for oneself, but for one's entire family. Rumors spread fast, and reputations rarely healed. A single careless moment could change a life. And so, many hid their emotions behind stillness, behind eyes lowered, voices quiet, and faces composed. Love became a silent endurance, a feeling carried within. But love still found its ways to speak. In festivals where villages danced beneath ribbons and lanterns, glances were exchanged. In marketplaces where laughter filled the air, hearts quickened at passing smiles. These were the only spaces where the rigidness of life softened for a while. And though these moments were fleeting, they reminded people that emotion could not be entirely contained. For noble circles, courtly love became both a symbol and a shield. It allowed affection to exist safely within the imagination. Knights could dedicate songs to ladies they could never touch, and women could receive admiration without breaking custom. It was love at a distance, elevated, poetic, and safe. But beneath its grace lay truth, the longing for freedom, for connection, for something more human than hierarchy could allow. In the great halls, tapestries hung with scenes of chivalry and devotion. They depicted knights kneeling before their ladies, offering loyalty as sacred as prayer. These images shaped how people thought of emotion, not as passion, but as service, as purity of heart. And yet the very existence of such art showed how deeply the desire for affection ran. Even in a world that preached restraint, love remained the most powerful story ever told. To love before marriage in medieval Europe was not only a personal act, it was a social risk, a quiet act of courage. It meant feeling what one was not supposed to feel, believing that emotion could exist outside approval. It was never about defiance, it was about being human in a world that asked for perfection. As centuries passed, these small acts of feeling began to change culture itself. The poems of troubadours, the tales of romance, the gentle verses written in hidden corners, they softened hearts, even among the pious and powerful. Slowly, love began to earn respect, to be seen not just as temptation, but as truth. And so, the meaning of love before marriage in the medieval world was complex. It was both sin and beauty, both danger and light. It lived in the shadows of duty, yet illuminated the very core of what it meant to be alive. Tonight, as we imagine that distant time, we might hear again the soft hum of a lute in a candlelit room, or the quiet laughter of villagers beneath a harvest moon. Those sounds carry the same rhythm that still beats in human hearts today, the rhythm of love, fragile, forbidden, and eternal. In the medieval world, wealth was measured in many ways: in land, in gold, in livestock, and in the number of strong hands a family could call its own. But for a woman, wealth meant something far more fragile, far more invisible: her reputation. It was the one thing she truly possessed, and the one thing she could lose in a single whisper. Reputation was not just how others saw her, it was her entire identity. It decided whether she was respected, trusted, or shunned. It shaped how she would live, whom she would marry, and how her children would be treated. For a medieval woman, her public image was as vital as breath. Without it, she was no one.
To be called modest, virtuous, and obedient was to wear a crown of invisible respect. It opened doors, secured marriage offers, and brought pride to one's kin. But a single rumor, a single suggestion of impropriety could undo it all. A glance mistaken, a friendship misunderstood, a small act of rebellion whispered about in the market could spread like wildfire. Once the seed of suspicion was planted, it rarely faded. The stain of a damaged reputation was almost impossible to wash away. In noble households, the rules were even stricter. A lady of rank carried not only her own reputation, but that of her entire lineage. The alliances her family formed, the titles they held, all depended on how the world perceived her virtue. Noble women were raised with care and caution, taught to walk, speak, and even smile within the limits of dignity. Their worth was not measured by knowledge or talent, but by restraint. They learned early that freedom had a price. To laugh too loudly, to speak too boldly, or to linger too long in conversation with a man could invite suspicion. Even kindness had to be tempered with calculation. In a world where power was inherited through marriage, her image was her dowry, the invisible currency that determined her future. For common women, the stakes were no less real. In small villages, reputation was survival. Neighbors shared everything: labor, harvests, and stories. And those stories often turned into judgments. A woman who was seen walking alone too often or who spoke her mind could quickly find herself the subject of whispered tales. Once her name was spoken in that tone, half pity, half disdain, her chances of marriage, of safety, and even of friendship could vanish. In both manor and meadow, reputation acted as a shield. It protected women from harm and ridicule, gave them standing in the eyes of their peers, and allowed them to navigate a society that often offered them little else. To lose it was to lose protection, to stand exposed before a world that judged harshly and forgave slowly. The church, too, played its part in defining and guarding this invisible wealth. Sermons echoed through stone walls, reminding women that virtue was their highest treasure, that purity was the path to heaven, and that modesty was the reflection of holiness. These lessons were meant to guide, but they also confined.
They taught women to see themselves as vessels of family honor and spiritual duty, rather than as individuals with desires or dreams of their own. And yet, most women believed these lessons wholeheartedly. In a society where survival depended on belonging, obedience brought safety. A good name meant trust. It meant work offered, help received, and doors kept open. To live without reputation was to live without community, an unthinkable fate. In the wealthy, reputation could also be manipulated, protected by power. A noble family might conceal a scandal through marriage, payment, or silence. But for those of lower rank, there was little to shield them. Their names lived in the mouths of others, and once spoken, words could never be taken back. It was a delicate balance, one that left many women walking a narrow line between respect and ruin. To be too quiet was to seem cold or proud. To be too kind was to seem inviting. Every gesture required care. And through it all, they learned the art of restraint, the silent strength of endurance in a world that never stopped watching. The irony of it all was that men's reputations rarely suffered in the same way. A man's mistakes might be forgiven, his indiscretions overlooked, his charm celebrated. But for women, even imagined faults could become life sentences. This double standard was accepted as natural, a truth repeated from one generation to the next. It was not questioned, it was simply the way of things. Still, women found subtle ways to protect themselves. Some built alliances with other women, friends, sisters, mothers, who offered support, advice, and shared understanding. In kitchens and marketplaces, behind closed doors and with whispering prayers, they found comfort in one another. These quiet bonds were acts of survival, small sanctuaries of empathy in a world that demanded perfection. Reputation also determined how a woman's story would be told after her death. Chronicles and local tales often remembered women not for what they did, but for how they were perceived. A kind woman was praised as virtuous. A bold one might be labeled unruly. A loving woman, if her love fell outside the accepted path, might be remembered only for her mistake. History, written mostly by men, preserved judgment more often than truth. And yet, through all this weight, there was dignity in how women carried themselves, their composure, their grace under scrutiny, their silence in the face of gossip. These were forms of strength. They learned to move through life carefully, to endure injustice quietly, and to protect what little power they had, their name. In the stillness of that world, a woman's reputation was her story, her shield, her only coin in the economy of survival. And though it was shaped by others, she bore the burden of guarding it herself. Imagine, for a moment, a young woman standing at the threshold of her cottage as dawn breaks. The village stirs around her, the sound of hooves, the laughter of children, the smoke of morning fires. She steps out quietly, aware that every eye might see her, every movement might be noted. Her reputation walks with her, like a shadow, silent, constant, and never her own. That shadow could mean the difference between being welcomed or shunned, loved or feared. It was an inheritance she did not choose, but one she had to protect with every breath. In this fragile balance of appearance and expectation, the medieval woman lived her life, carefully, gracefully, and often courageously. Her reputation was her only wealth, but her resilience was her hidden treasure. In the medieval world, love was a quiet thing. It did not shout, it whispered. It lived in glances across crowded courtyards, in folded letters carried by trusted hands, and in the brief touch of fingers passing bread or water. But just as quickly as love could blossom, it could wither under the weight of suspicion. For women, especially, affection was a path that could lead not to happiness, but to danger. The boundary between love and scandal was not a wide road, it was a thread, thin and delicate, and one misstep could tear it apart. In a society where reputation meant survival, the act of caring too deeply or too openly could undo years of quiet virtue. Even emotions that were pure could be turned into weapons by those eager to judge. In noble courts and peasant villages alike, love was governed by rules, spoken and unspoken. The Church declared that love must exist only within marriage, sanctified by ceremony and witnessed by God. Yet the heart, as it always does, often ignored such boundaries. A young woman might feel affection before vows were spoken. A glance, exchanged at the wrong time, could spark feelings that neither faith nor reason could silence. But the medieval world was not kind to feelings that stepped beyond control. A smile that lingered too long could be noticed. A letter found could become evidence. A secret meeting could turn into gossip by sunrise. And once gossip began, it took on its own life. A wildfire of words that burned faster than truth could travel.
For men, these whispers were often fleeting. A man's flirtation might be seen as harmless, even charming. For a woman, it was ruinous. Her virtue was assumed to be fragile, and once questioned, it rarely recovered. What began as affection could quickly transform into accusation. What began as a story of love could end as a story of shame. The Church played both protector and punisher in this fragile balance. Priests preached of purity and penance, reminding the faithful that even thoughts could be sinful. Yet confessions often revealed the same story again and again. That love came uninvited, that emotion was stronger than instruction, and that forgiveness was sought for what the heart could not control. Many women knelt before the altar, whispering apologies for feelings that had never found expression, for emotions that existed only in silence. Among the nobility, the risks were masked by wealth, but not erased. Courtly love, the romantic ideal of noble knights admiring ladies from afar, created a world of dangerous beauty. Poems were written, songs composed, glances exchanged beneath banners and tapestries. But though the words were elegant, the consequences were real. A lady's reputation could still suffer, even from admiration unreturned. The songs that praised her beauty might also mark her as bold, proud, or unattainable. For peasant women, the line between affection and scandal was even sharper. Life in a village left little room for privacy. A conversation at the well could be seen. A visit after dusk could be noticed. Even if no wrong had been done, stories could form in the gaps of what people thought they saw. And in those small, tight-knit communities, stories were as binding as law. Sometimes a woman's heart would lead her to trust, to believe that love might lead to marriage, that promises whispered in secret could one day be fulfilled. But if those promises broke, the consequences were borne by her alone. Society rarely blamed the man who walked away. Instead, it turned its full gaze upon her, questioning her worth, her morality, her very character. This imbalance was not born from cruelty alone. It was built into the structure of medieval life. The church, the law, and custom all worked together to preserve order. And order demanded that women remain pure, obedient, and quiet. Love that stepped outside that narrow space was treated not as a feeling, but as a fault. Yet, even within such confinement,
love persisted. It found ways to survive, in secret gestures, in whispered prayers, in moments too brief to name. A hand brushing another in passing, a gift left quietly on a doorstep, a glance shared beneath a church arch. These were the soft rebellions of the heart. They were as dangerous as they were beautiful. It is easy now, centuries later, to see the unfairness of it, to wonder how a world could condemn something so human. But in that world, rules were not merely social. They were sacred. To love outside of them was to step into the unknown, to risk not only reputation, but salvation. Fear and faith intertwined, creating a silence that covered so many untold stories. And so, women learned to love in stillness. They became masters of restraint, protectors of their own secrets. A woman might feel affection burning inside her, yet never let it show upon her face. She might carry memories of a smile, a word, or a meeting for a lifetime, never speaking it aloud. In her silence, she protected herself, and sometimes the one she loved. The line between love and scandal was so fragile that even kindness could cross it. A woman showing compassion to a lonely man, helping him in illness or sorrow, could find herself accused of impropriety. Goodness could be mistaken for desire, and empathy for intention. It was a dangerous tenderness, one that demanded constant vigilance. Those who were accused had few ways to defend themselves. The truth mattered less than the story people chose to believe. And when whispers turned into judgment, a woman's life could change overnight. Friendships could vanish. Work could be denied. Doors could close. What had begun as love, innocent, hopeful, and deeply human, could leave her standing alone, her name forever marked. Yet, despite this, love continued to exist, quietly, stubbornly, endlessly. It was a force that no law could erase, no sermon could silence. For every woman who suffered from gossip or disgrace, there were countless others who loved quietly and endured without notice, whose stories faded peacefully into time. Love, even in its most forbidden form, gave meaning to lives that might otherwise have been bound by duty and silence. It reminded them that beneath the rules and judgments, they were still human, still capable of feeling deeply, still longing for connection in a world that valued obedience over emotion. In that sense, the fragile line between love and scandal was not only a danger, it was also a mirror. It reflected the struggle between heart and world, between what was right and what was real. It revealed how deeply people longed for something more than rules, for understanding, for warmth, for tenderness. As night falls over the quiet medieval village, imagine the faint sound of a lute from a distant window, the flicker of a candle behind a shutter, and two hearts beating in secret harmony. Love exists there, not as rebellion, but as survival. And even when the world turned it into scandal, love refused to disappear. It remained quiet and eternal, just beyond the reach of judgment. In a world governed by duty, where love was often a quiet rebellion, hope was the light that kept many hearts alive. For medieval women, love rarely began with permission. It began in moments too small for notice. A look, a word, a kindness that stayed in the mind long after the day was done. And when those moments grew into affection, they often gave birth to something dangerous yet beautiful: secret promises. Love in medieval Europe was not only a matter of the heart, it was a matter of survival, of trust, and of faith in another person's word. For women especially, promises carried enormous weight. A man's spoken vow could mean everything: safety, legitimacy, and a future. When he whispered that he would marry her, it wasn't just romance. It was hope given form. In a time when most unions were arranged, the idea of choosing one's partner for love was almost revolutionary. But it happened, quietly, courageously, and often in secret. Peasant girls, noble daughters, and even widows sometimes found themselves drawn to affection outside of what family or faith allowed. And when love could not be declared openly, promises became their secret language. Many such promises were spoken in the stillness of the countryside, near a river, behind a barn, or in the dim glow of a hearth after others had gone to sleep. A man might swear before God that he would wed the woman he loved, binding himself not through law, but through words. To the lovers, those words felt sacred. To the world, they meant nothing unless witnessed and recorded. The church recognized something called verba di presenti, words of present consent. If two people said they took each other as husband and wife, in the eyes of God, that could constitute a marriage. But without witnesses, such unions were fragile. If the man later denied his promise, her word alone was rarely enough to prove it. Her faith in his love could become her downfall. Still, many women believed. They wanted to. In a world where choice was limited, love felt like freedom. A promise of marriage was not merely a romantic dream. It was a doorway to a life chosen, not assigned. To be loved, to be wanted, to be seen. These were things worth risking everything for. Sometimes these secret unions were followed by tender letters. Written in rough Latin or simple vernacular, they carried phrases of devotion, hopes of a shared life, and reassurances that their love was pure and meant for God's blessing. Few of these letters survive, but those that do speak softly across time. Words like, "I am yours as I have always been," and "In your eyes I find my home." They are fragments of human emotion preserved like pressed flowers, fragile yet eternal. For noble women, the risks were greater still. A promise of marriage without her family's approval could destroy alliances, insult noble houses, and cause political disgrace. Yet even within stone castles, hearts found ways to disobey. A knight's oath, a hidden meeting in the castle garden, a letter delivered by a trusted maid. These were the fragile acts of defiance that kept love alive in a world ruled by arrangement. Many such stories ended quietly, never known beyond the hearts of those who lived them. Some ended in happiness, a union eventually blessed, families persuaded, reputations mended. But others ended in heartbreak, as men who had sworn eternal love succumbed to pressure, ambition, or fear. For the women left behind, those broken promises were more than emotional wounds. They were social death sentences. A love that had begun in faith could turn into lifelong shame. Yet even in that heartbreak, there was dignity. A woman might weep in private, but she would carry herself with grace before the world. Some sought solace in the church, devoting their lives to prayer and service. Others buried their past in silence and began again, never speaking the name of the man who once vowed to be hers. Their strength, quiet and enduring, became the hidden thread of history. For those who did find joy, love transformed their lives. A man who kept his promise, who defied his family or society to wed the woman he loved, was both a hero and a fool in the eyes of others. Their marriages were often modest, a ceremony witnessed by a priest, a few friends, perhaps under the open sky. But in those moments, love triumphed over order. For a heartbeat in history, two people stood together not because they were told to, but because they chose to. Such unions remind us that medieval life was not only hardship and hierarchy, it was also filled with courage and quiet hope. Behind the rules and rituals, people longed for connection, for understanding, for the simple grace of being loved in return. In peasant cottages, lovers carved initials into wood. In manor houses, noble ladies kept small tokens, a piece of ribbon, a lock of hair, a ring hidden beneath layers of fabric. These objects were more than keepsakes. They were promises made tangible, proof of emotions too dangerous to name aloud. A woman might hold such a token in her hands and whisper a prayer for its keeper, hoping that somewhere under the same sky he was thinking of her too. But secrets are heavy things. As days turned into seasons, and seasons into years, many women carried their promises in silence, never knowing if they would be fulfilled. The hope that once burned bright could become a quiet ache, a reminder of what was promised and what was lost. And yet, even then, they held on to faith. Faith not in the man, but in the meaning of love itself. For in the end, love was the one thing that made the harshness of their world bearable. It was the warmth against the cold, the melody beneath the noise of duty and labor. Whether kept or broken, it left its mark upon their souls, shaping who they were and how they endured. When we think of medieval love stories today, we often imagine romance and chivalry, knights and ladies, poetry and courtly devotion. But behind those images were real people with trembling hands and uncertain hearts. Their love was not perfect. It was fragile, flawed, and often fated to pain. Yet in that fragility, there was something profoundly human. As you listen, imagine a small cottage at dusk, the last light of day spilling through the window, the sound of a fire crackling, and two hands meeting in quiet understanding. Outside, the world would not approve, but inside, for a moment, love existed freely. A promise was made, soft, sacred, and real. It is in these moments, hidden in time, that we find the truest stories of the medieval heart, where love, though dangerous, was also the one thing worth believing in. In medieval Europe, the world was ruled by appearances. A woman's worth was measured in her virtue, her obedience, and her family's respect. To live outside the boundaries society set was to invite scrutiny, and few situations carried as much danger to reputation as a woman expecting a child before marriage. The moment a woman realized she was carrying a child outside the protection of a lawful union, she entered a world of uncertainty. The streets, which once seemed familiar, could suddenly feel unforgiving. Neighbors who once smiled might turn away. Friends who once offered comfort could whisper in secret, unsure whether to offer sympathy or judgment. The warm embrace of community could vanish overnight, replaced by cold eyes and cautious distance. In villages and towns alike, isolation became one of the first burdens. A woman might retreat to her home, leaving behind the bustling life of daily work and conversation. She would watch the marketplace from the edge, careful not to draw attention, careful not to invite gossip. The quiet steps she took through her day were measured, calculated, and weary. Every interaction became a test of patience, of discretion, of survival. Family, too, could react in ways both protective and painful. Parents might hide their daughter from view, sending her to a relative or even a distant village until the child was born. Their actions, though meant to preserve honor, often carried a sting of judgment. The message was clear. Her mistake was her own, and the family's reputation depended on her silence. While love and compassion might exist behind closed doors, society allowed very little space for public forgiveness. Even within the church, where mercy was preached, a woman could feel the weight of shame. Priests offered guidance, prayer, and absolution, but they also reminded her of the rules she had broken. Every confession was a reminder of the fragile line between sin and redemption. She could seek comfort in ritual, in candlelight, and in quiet reflection. But the external world remained harsh. Forgiveness did not erase whispers, nor did prayer remove the cautious glances of neighbors.
The social consequences extended beyond judgment. Marriage, which had once been a distant hope, could slip away entirely. Families and suitors might see her as no longer suitable,
fearing scandal or dishonor. A woman who had once held prospects of a union, for love, security, or both, could find herself excluded from those opportunities, her future redirected by a single circumstance. Even as she carried a life within her, she often felt a sense of solitude deeper than any physical distance. For noble women, the stakes were even higher. In families where alliances, land, and power were secured through marriage, a child born outside wedlock could alter political plans. A woman's prospects were tied not only to her family's wealth, but to its standing in the broader world of influence. One perceived misstep could ripple across generations, affecting brothers, cousins, and future heirs. In such households, secrecy became essential. Every gesture, every word, every step was measured against the potential for exposure. The child, though innocent, became a silent symbol of a breach in social order. The emotional burden was constant. Even when supported in secret, a woman could feel the weight of loneliness pressing from every side. Her friends might visit less frequently, her neighbors may avoid casual conversation, and her family might treat her with a careful distance. The world she had once navigated freely now required caution. Each encounter could remind her of judgment, each interaction a subtle test of resilience. She learned to speak softly, to move quietly, and to carry her dignity like armor. Still, within this struggle, women found strength. They relied on small acts of self-preservation, keeping to routine, seeking quiet companionship with other women, and maintaining dignity in the simplest tasks of life. Work became a refuge. Household chores, tending the garden, or preparing meals offered a rhythm that steadied the mind. In the hours of labor, thoughts of shame could be held at bay by the repetition of daily life. Small victories, like a kind word from a trusted neighbor or the quiet support of a sister or cousin, became lifelines. Pregnancy, though perilous socially, also brought a focus beyond self. The woman's attention often shifted to the life she carried, a fragile presence that needed protection, care, and hope. Her world expanded to include the child, whose future she would protect with discretion, wisdom, and patience. In that sense, her struggle was not only about survival, but about nurturing resilience, both in herself and in the life she would one day raise. Community rules, strict as they were, could sometimes offer subtle support. In many towns and villages, older women who had themselves walked through hardship provided guidance and encouragement. They offered advice on maintaining dignity, managing labor, and navigating social challenges. Though unspoken and discreet, these networks were lifelines, and in them, women found quiet solidarity, shared understanding, and the courage to endure. Isolation, however, was never complete. Though whispers and glances could wound, they could not erase the inner strength many women discovered in these circumstances. Some found solace in prayer, believing that divine mercy extended beyond human judgment. Others drew courage from planning for the future, imagining a life beyond the narrow scrutiny of their present. The child became a symbol not only of challenge, but also of hope, a reminder that life continued even in the harshest of circumstances. In stories that survived, we find women who, despite social pressure and judgment, persevered. They walked through days that might have seemed endless, performing tasks with care and dignity, and holding their heads high even when the world treated them otherwise. The quiet heroism of these women is easy to overlook. It is not celebrated in grand chronicles or songs, yet it forms the backbone of countless untold histories. Their struggles were not just personal. They were reflections of a society that measured women by virtue, obedience, and reputation. Yet these challenges revealed an inner life as rich, thoughtful, and enduring as any celebrated figure. Courage, after all, often exists not in public acts of heroism, but in the quiet, unobserved choices we make every day. The world they inhabited demanded silence, yet their resilience speaks across the centuries. Imagine a woman standing at the threshold of her home, the late sun casting long shadows over the fields, her eyes turned toward the horizon with cautious hope. Though the path ahead is uncertain, she moves forward with care, determination, and quiet grace. In remembering these women, we see not tragedy alone, but strength. We see how love, expectation, and consequence intertwined to shape lives. We see how society judged harshly, but how the human spirit endured. And in that endurance, there is a lesson that transcends time, that dignity, courage, and hope are often found in the quietest of struggles. Tonight, as we imagine their world, we can hear the soft rustle of linen, the gentle sigh of wind through village streets, the quiet heartbeat of a woman carrying both her own burdens and the weight of another life. These are the stories that history often leaves behind, the stories of strength in silence, of love constrained by circumstance, and of lives navigated with courage beyond recognition. In the world of medieval Europe, unwed mothers faced the most delicate of balances between social judgment and personal survival, between shame and hope, between the gaze of society and the quiet voice of their own hearts. And yet, even within these fragile constraints, they endured. They protected what they could, nurtured what mattered, and carried their lives forward with patience and dignity. Their struggles, unseen by most, were not forgotten by history. They remind us that strength is not always loud, and courage is not always celebrated. Sometimes it is the quiet endurance of a woman navigating the harshest currents of society that teaches us the most about the resilience of the human heart. In medieval Europe, a woman's life was rarely her own. Her choices, her movements, and even her thoughts existed within a web of family, faith, and community. Every action carried weight, and every misstep could ripple through the lives of those around her. Nowhere was this more evident in the consequences of love, desire, or a circumstance that challenged the social order, especially when a woman found herself at odds with society's strict expectations. Family was the first and most immediate lens through which judgment passed. From the moment a daughter was born, her family carried responsibility for her reputation, and her actions were reflections of their honor. When a young woman faced scandal or even the perception of it, the family was forced to respond. Their reactions could be as varied as the individuals themselves, protective, practical, or harsh. Some families offered quiet support. Mothers, sisters, aunts, and even fathers sometimes shielded their daughters from public scrutiny. They offered advice, counsel, and emotional comfort. A mother might quietly ensure that her daughter's daily life remained dignified, that neighbors saw only the careful, measured steps of a woman maintaining her household. Sisters might act as confidants, helping her navigate a world that had suddenly grown more complex and dangerous. In these small acts, love and loyalty became forms of protection. Yet, support was never unconditional. Even those who offered comfort understood the delicate balance of social perception. One misstep could undo years of effort to preserve family honor. A whispered rumor, a late-night visit, or even an innocent exchange with a neighbor could escalate into scandal. Families often had to act strategically, making choices that preserved their own standing even as they tried to shield their loved one. Discretion was the first rule and silence the most powerful tool.
Other families, however, prioritized reputation over compassion. In such cases, a woman could find herself turned away, hidden from view, or sent to live elsewhere until her situation passed. These actions were rarely cruel in intent. They were calculated measures to maintain honor, to prevent judgment from spreading, to protect the family name. The woman might feel isolated, abandoned, or misunderstood,
Yet from the family's perspective, such steps were necessary to survive in a world where reputation was everything. Community judgment was even more pervasive. Villages, towns, and even courts operated as tight-knit systems of observation. People watched each other carefully, noting behavior, interpreting glances, and recalling stories from years past. Gossip was a powerful currency. It could elevate, but more often it could destroy. In such a society, what one whispered in confidence could be heard and repeated in the marketplace, the chapel, or along the road to the mill. A woman's reputation, fragile as it was, often hung in the balance of collective perception. Even if her family defended her, neighbors and acquaintances might doubt, whisper, or speculate. A kind gesture could be misinterpreted, a glance taken out of context, a walk at dusk remembered and retold. In this environment, living carefully became essential. Every action, every word, every decision had to account for the invisible eyes of the community. Sometimes the judgment was subtle. People might avoid offering invitations, hesitate in conversation, or speak in guarded tones. Other times it was direct, whispers that turned to gossip, rumors that spread like wildfire, or public discussions that left no room for misunderstanding. Even if a woman remained dignified, the perception of wrongdoing could follow her, shaping her future, her marriage prospects, and her place in society. The church, often intertwined with both family and community, added another layer of observation. Priests and nuns, while offering spiritual guidance and comfort, also reinforced societal expectations. They reminded communities of virtue, chastity, and proper behavior. Confession, penance, and ritual acted as both comfort and correction, emphasizing the need to live within accepted bounds. A woman navigating judgment had to contend not only with human scrutiny, but spiritual expectation as well. The combined weight of family and community judgment could be overwhelming. It forced women to develop extraordinary awareness, patience, and resilience. Some learned to walk in measured steps, speak in carefully chosen words, and act with deliberate grace. Others became adept at secrecy, carrying their emotions privately, performing necessary duties publicly, and managing relationships in ways that minimized exposure. Yet even within such constraint, moments of compassion existed. A supportive neighbor, a wise elder, or a protective sibling could provide relief, reassurance, or guidance. These small gestures of understanding, though subtle, could give a woman the strength to endure what might otherwise have been unbearable. Solidarity, even when hidden, offered hope. For noble families, the dynamics were magnified. Alliances, inheritances, and social standing depended on appearances. A single incident could ripple across households and regions, affecting marriages, partnerships, and even political influence. In such circles, discretion was practiced with extreme care. Letters were kept private, meetings were secret, and explanations were crafted to preserve honor while minimizing harm. Yet no matter how carefully managed, the judgment of peers always loomed. Even outside the noble courts, the consequences were tangible. A peasant woman whose reputation had been questioned might lose the chance to marry a suitable partner. A widow or unmarried mother could find herself excluded from social events or left out of communal support. Every decision, from daily chores to social interactions, was shadowed by the knowledge that her life was being observed and evaluated. Through all of this, women learned to navigate judgment with skill. They developed intuition about whom to trust, when to speak, and when to remain silent. They discovered the power of subtlety, the strength in measured gestures, and the importance of inner dignity. While the world outside might question, scrutinize, or condemn, they carried an inner life of quiet courage and resilience. Family and community judgment also created a form of shared history. Stories of women who had faced scandal, who had endured judgment, or who had quietly succeeded despite adversity were passed down. These narratives shaped the behavior of younger generations, teaching them how to navigate social structures and offering lessons in both caution and strength. In this way, judgment, harsh though it might be, became a teacher, albeit a demanding one. Yet judgment was not purely punitive. It also reinforced norms, created structure, and maintained order. In a society where survival depended on social cohesion, the opinions of family and neighbors mattered deeply. For women, learning to understand, respect, and maneuver within these expectations was essential. It was not merely about avoiding shame, it was about ensuring one's place in the intricate web of medieval life. In essence, a woman's world was shaped by observation. Her life was intertwined with the perceptions, beliefs, and decisions of those around her. Family could offer protection or impose distance. Community could offer support or deliver condemnation. Gossip, though often unfair, served as both warning and guidance. Through all of this, women learned the delicate art of survival, balancing their desires, preserving dignity, and moving cautiously in a world that watched them at every turn. Tonight, as we imagine the villages, towns, and manors of medieval Europe, we can hear the subtle heartbeat of judgment. Quiet conversations at the well, hushed voices in market stalls, and careful glances across the stone floors of castle halls. We can sense the careful steps women took to navigate these currents, and we can honor their resilience. In the end, family and community judgment was not simply a force of control. It was the mirror in which women saw both the constraints and the possibilities of their world. It revealed the fragility of reputation, the consequences of perception, and the extraordinary courage required to live within such scrutiny. And it reminds us that behind every whispered story, every cautious glance, every carefully measured action, there was a woman walking her path with strength, dignity, and quiet determination. In medieval Europe, the church was not merely a building or a set of rituals. It was the lens through which much of life was judged and understood. Its influence extended into every corner of society, shaping behavior, guiding morality, and often determining the paths of women whose lives were constrained by both circumstance and expectation. When a woman faced challenges such as love, loss, or pregnancy outside marriage, the church often became the central arbiter of her actions, her choices, and her sense of self. Confession was the first step on the path of reconciliation with both faith and society. A woman who felt that she had stepped beyond the boundaries of virtue was encouraged, or sometimes compelled, to come before a priest and speak openly of her situation.
These moments of confession were delicate and deeply personal. The priest acted as both a spiritual guide and a moral authority, listening carefully, offering counsel, and suggesting the appropriate forms of penance. The act of confessing was not simply about acknowledging wrongdoing. It was about restoring balance between the individual, God, and the broader community. Penance took many forms, depending on the perceived severity of the transgression. Some were simple, a prayer, fasting, or small charitable acts performed over a period of days. Others required more sustained devotion, attending Mass regularly, giving alms to the poor, or performing acts of service within the local church. Penance was meant not to humiliate, but to instill reflection and self-discipline. It created a structured path toward redemption, allowing women to regain a sense of moral clarity even as they navigated the judgments of the world outside. Yet, penance could also feel burdensome. The constant reminder of one's perceived failings, combined with the scrutiny of family and neighbors, could weigh heavily on a woman's spirit. It was a daily negotiation between private conscience and public expectation. Every prayer, every ritual became both a source of comfort and a reminder of constraint. In this tension, faith assumed a dual role. It was simultaneously a source of discipline and a reservoir of hope. The Church's teachings emphasized that forgiveness was always possible. No matter the mistake, the path of repentance offered the promise of reconciliation with God. This belief was a lifeline for many women. In the quiet of a stone chapel, candlelight flickering and incense rising, they could feel absolution wash over them. The rituals of confession, the words of a forgiving priest, and the structured acts of penance provided a framework within which a woman could reclaim her dignity and sense of self. It was, in a sense, a spiritual homecoming, a way to restore balance within a world that often seemed unforgiving. Faith also created community support. Women who undertook penance were often observed, subtly guided, or assisted by others in their parish. Elders, nuns, and even fellow parishioners provided quiet encouragement. They ensured that the penitent could fulfill her spiritual obligations while maintaining dignity in daily life. In these acts, religion became not only a system of judgment, but also a network of support, offering structure, understanding, and gentle guidance in a world fraught with uncertainty. However, the Church's response was never entirely gentle. Sermons, teachings, and moral instruction reinforced societal expectations, often emphasizing obedience, chastity, and virtue. Women were reminded of the consequences of straying from the righteous path. Gossip, judgment, and social pressures were reinforced by religious authority, creating an environment where mistakes were both spiritual and social challenges. A woman had to navigate not only her own conscience, but the intricate expectations of her family, neighbors, and God's representatives. Examples of church intervention can be found across both village life and noble households. In small parishes, a priest might provide daily counsel to a young woman, guiding her through her penance and offering advice on how to restore social standing. In larger towns, religious figures sometimes mediated disputes, ensured that penances were fulfilled, and offered counsel to families concerned about honor and reputation. In castles and manors, chaplains often guided noble women in maintaining their spiritual and social responsibilities, blending moral instruction with practical advice. Faith in these circumstances was a paradox. On one hand, it imposed discipline, created boundaries, and underscored the dangers of deviation from societal norms. On the other, it offered hope, the possibility of forgiveness, the chance to reclaim honor, and the assurance that a woman's worth was not entirely determined by past missteps. Even as judgment echoed in whispers, the Church promised a path forward, emphasizing that redemption was achievable through reflection, action, and devotion. The duality of punishment and forgiveness created a subtle rhythm in women's lives. Morning prayers, acts of penance, and quiet reflection were balanced with careful daily behavior, observation of social norms, and discreet attention to family expectations. In this way, the spiritual and the social were intertwined, shaping how women lived, what they valued, and how they responded to challenges. Faith became both a guide and a shield, a source of moral clarity and emotional sustenance. The rituals of the Church, confession, penance, and absolution, were not only about individual morality, they also reinforced social order. By participating in these acts, women reaffirmed their place in the community, demonstrating compliance with societal and spiritual norms. Even as they experienced personal growth and emotional healing, their public participation reassured others that balance and virtue had been restored. It is important to note that these experiences were deeply personal. A woman might enter the chapel feeling fear, shame, or grief, yet leave with a sense of calm, resolution, or hope. The sacred environment, structured rituals, and empathetic guidance offered a space where emotions could be processed without public censure. Within the walls of the church, she could reconcile the tension between personal desire and societal expectation, finding inner peace amid external pressures. Ultimately, the church's response reflected the complexity of medieval life. It was at once strict and forgiving, judgmental and compassionate. Women learned to navigate its teachings carefully, understanding that faith could be a source of both restraint and liberation. Confession and penance allowed them to acknowledge mistakes, reflect on choices, and regain spiritual and social footing. Hope, fostered through forgiveness, provided the courage to move forward, even in a world that often judged too harshly. As we imagine the quiet stone chapels, the flickering candles, and the soft murmur of prayer, we can see how faith shaped lives in subtle but profound ways. The church offered a framework within which women could endure judgment, restore honor, and reclaim dignity. Its rituals created a rhythm, a steady structure in a world that could otherwise feel chaotic and unyielding. Even in their most private moments, women carried this presence with them, a reminder that while society observed, faith provided guidance. Where whispers judged, hope offered solace. And where the weight of expectation pressed down, forgiveness could lift them, if only just enough, to walk another day with quiet courage. In this delicate balance, medieval women learned that moral structure and human empathy could coexist. The Church, through its acts of confession, penance, and redemption, shaped lives with both caution and care. And it reminds us, centuries later, that even in a world dominated by rules, faith could remain a source of hope. A gentle light illuminating paths forward, even in the darkest and most uncertain of circumstances.
In the delicate world of medieval Europe, love was often a fragile promise. A glance, a whispered vow, or a secret meeting could spark hope and warmth, only for fate, circumstance, or human weakness to take it away. For women, abandonment could arrive suddenly, a man leaving, a promise broken, or circumstances shifting beyond their control. And yet, even in the face of such despair, women demonstrated a quiet resilience, a capacity to adapt and rebuild that history rarely celebrates, but which pulses through the fabric of their lives. The emotional impact of abandonment was profound. A woman who had trusted her heart, who had believed in the bonds of affection and promise, could find herself alone, judged by the community, and uncertain of the path ahead. The quiet of her home might feel heavier, filled with echoes of words never spoken, of hopes unfulfilled. Every familiar space, the hearth, the fields, the village street, could remind her of absence, of the life she had imagined and the reality that had replaced it. Yet, survival demanded endurance. Medieval women, constrained by social expectation and economic necessity, found ways to navigate the world despite loss. Work became both refuge and necessity. Daily routines, once simple, took on new significance. Caring for a household, tending livestock, preparing meals, and managing chores provided structure, focus, and a sense of purpose amid emotional upheaval. Through labor, the weight of despair could be held at bay, and small achievements offered affirmation of self-worth. Some women sought refuge in distant villages or towns, leaving behind familiar faces, streets, and whispers. Relocation offered anonymity and a fresh start, a chance to rebuild both reputation and life. In these new surroundings, they could forge connections carefully, observe the rhythms of the community, and protect themselves from judgment. Though displacement carried challenges, unfamiliar customs, new responsibilities, and the isolation of distance, it also offered hope, the opportunity to craft a life unshadowed by past events. Convents also became a refuge for many. Life within religious houses offered safety, routine, and a supportive community. For some, it was a path chosen willingly, drawn by faith and the promise of purpose. For others, it was necessity, a sanctuary from social judgment and a place to live with dignity. Within convent walls, women could dedicate themselves to study, prayer, and service, finding meaning and stability even when the world outside seemed unforgiving. Here, courage was not measured in outward defiance, but in the daily commitment to live fully and honorably within structured walls guided by faith and solidarity. Resilience often manifested in quieter ways, too. Women drew on networks of family, friends, and trusted neighbors for support, sometimes discreetly, sometimes openly. Advice, small acts of kindness, or shared labor became lifelines. In whispered conversations behind closed doors or in shared meals, they found validation, encouragement, and the reassurance that life could continue despite setbacks. These quiet acts of solidarity reinforced strength and nurtured endurance. Emotionally, women learned to navigate grief with a combination of reflection, hope, and careful planning. Letters, prayers, and meditative practices offered solace. Memories of lost love were honored privately, yet life had to move forward publicly. Each day became a careful negotiation, tending to responsibilities while managing inner sorrow, performing expected duties while seeking small moments of comfort. Through this duality, women cultivated emotional fortitude, learning that strength often emerges not in grand gestures, but in consistent acts of self-preservation and thoughtful resilience. Rebuilding life required adaptability. A woman might seek employment in a different household, arrange marriages for herself or her daughters with careful attention to social expectation, or find new ways to secure her livelihood. Every decision was influenced by both practical need and social perception. Adaptation was not merely survival, it was a skillful balancing act between ambition, caution, and hope. Those who succeeded quietly navigated social pressures while protecting their dignity, creating new opportunities from limited circumstances. Even in the face of abandonment, courage shone through in subtle, persistent ways. Women took responsibility for themselves and their children, maintained social relationships, and often found joy and meaning in daily life. Their resilience was a testament to the human spirit, the ability to endure hardship, recover from emotional loss, and continue to seek purpose, community, and hope. It was a strength both quiet and enduring, present in tasks performed, choices made, and lives rebuilt. Historical accounts suggest that women who endured abandonment often became pillars within their communities. They modeled perseverance, resourcefulness, and the capacity for measured action in difficult circumstances. They taught younger generations how to navigate social expectations, how to maintain dignity under scrutiny, and how to cultivate hope even when the world seemed unforgiving. Their lives, though often unrecorded in official histories, left traces in the social fabric of villages and towns, shaping expectations, customs, and communal memory. Importantly, resilience did not require public recognition. Courage often existed in private moments. In the quiet of early morning as she tended her fields, in the careful management of household duties, in whispered prayers by candlelight, or in the gentle guidance of her children. These acts of perseverance, repeated daily, became the true measure of endurance. Each task completed, each decision made with care, and each day survived in dignity was a quiet triumph, a testament to human strength under pressure. The emotional journey of abandonment was rarely linear. Grief, sorrow, hope, and determination coexisted, shaping identity over time. Women learned to honor loss while embracing new possibilities, to reflect on pain while planning for the future. Their lives were a testament to adaptability, the capacity to transform despair into purpose, and to find meaning in both continuity and change. In imagining these women, one might picture a young mother walking along a narrow village path at dawn. The fog lifts slowly over the fields, birds begin their songs, and the world is quiet but alive. She carries within her the memory of love lost, yet she moves forward, steady, thoughtful, and resilient. Each step is measured, each decision deliberate, each day a quiet assertion of courage. In her endurance, there is a lesson for all generations, that strength is not always loud, and that human dignity often shines brightest in the face of adversity. Even centuries later, we can see how these women shaped their world. Their resilience allowed communities to thrive, families to endure, and cultural values to persist. They demonstrated that human strength is most apparent not in the absence of hardship, but in the capacity to navigate it with courage, dignity, and unwavering determination.
Even in love lost, there was hope. Hope nurtured in small acts, in secret reflection, and in the courage to continue forward. In this endurance, women claimed their place in a world that demanded too much and offered too little, proving that human strength is often most powerful when it is quiet, steady, and unseen. In medieval Europe, a woman's world was rarely public. The streets, fields, and courts offered little privacy, and every action could be observed, judged, or whispered about. Yet within this scrutiny, women carved out spaces of quiet refuge, places where they could breathe, think, and act with a freedom that society rarely allowed. These hidden lives were not acts of rebellion in the loud sense. They were subtler, quieter, and often necessary for survival. Sanctuary could take many forms. A distant relative's household, far from the familiar eyes of neighbors and family, offered a woman safety and a chance to rebuild her life. In these homes, she could work, care for family, and live without constant judgment. The anonymity of a new village or town provided relief, allowing her to navigate relationships carefully, form friendships, and regain a sense of dignity. In such places, women discovered that even in constraint, choice could exist, small, measured, and deeply meaningful. Convents were another sanctuary. For those who chose or were compelled to enter religious life, these spaces offered not only protection, but also purpose. Within convent walls, women found community, education, and spiritual guidance. The rhythm of daily life, prayer, study, service, and reflection provided structure and calm. Here, women could cultivate skills, engage in creative work, and participate in decision-making within the limits of their environment. Convents became places where intellect, devotion, and resilience were nurtured in quiet, deliberate ways. Even outside formal institutions, hidden networks existed. Women often relied on friends, mothers, sisters, and trusted neighbors to share knowledge, provide support, and offer counsel. These networks were subtle but powerful. Advice on managing household affairs, navigating social pressures, or planning for the future was passed through whispered conversations or discreet correspondence. These acts of solidarity allowed women to protect each other, share resources, and maintain dignity in a world that offered little room for error. Private spaces, the garden behind a house, the attic of a manor, a quiet corner of the local chapel, became arenas of reflection and agency. Women could make decisions, nurture relationships, and pursue small projects without interference. It was here that letters were written, tasks were planned, and futures imagined. Even in the most restrictive environments, the human desire for connection, self-expression, and purposeful action found ways to manifest. Quiet defiance often took subtle forms. A woman might resist gossip by maintaining composure in public, refuse to answer intrusive questions, or redirect conversations in ways that protected her privacy. She might support others in similar situations, sharing wisdom, practical guidance, or emotional encouragement. These acts were rarely celebrated or recorded, yet they were powerful demonstrations of agency within a constrained world. Defiance did not always roar. Sometimes it existed in measured steps, careful choices, and the courage to act despite risk. Sanctuary could extend beyond physical spaces. Emotional refuge, cultivated through prayer, reflection, and careful companionship, allowed women to endure societal pressures. Private meditation, correspondence with trusted confidants, and secret mentoring relationships provided mental and spiritual support. Within these safe spaces, women nurtured resilience, maintained hope, and preserved dignity, even when external circumstances were harsh or unyielding. Historical examples suggest that such hidden lives were not uncommon. A woman might leave her village temporarily to live with a cousin, quietly manage her affairs, and return only when the environment felt safe. Another might enter a convent for a period of study or recovery, emerging later to participate in family or community life with renewed confidence. Others maintained secret lines of communication with loved ones or allies, creating networks that allowed them to navigate challenges more effectively. Even when constrained by social norms or economic pressures, women found ways to exercise agency. They organized households, managed finances, instructed children, and maintained relationships on their terms. These choices, though often unseen, had lasting impact. A household managed with intelligence and care could ensure survival, stability, and reputation. A woman's quiet guidance shaped the values and opportunities of the next generation, leaving traces of influence that stretched beyond immediate observation. Sanctuary and secrecy were not only practical but also deeply emotional. Women needed spaces to process grief, disappointment, or fear. They needed time to reflect on love lost, broken promises, or social rejection. The ability to retreat, even briefly, allowed emotional renewal. It offered perspective, resilience, and clarity, enabling them to face the external world with renewed determination. In many cases, the courage to maintain hidden lives reflected extraordinary human strength. Women balanced multiple roles simultaneously: caregiver, worker, confidant, student of faith, and silent strategist of survival. They navigated social expectations while maintaining personal dignity, protected their families and communities while asserting their own agency, and managed emotional landscapes with care and foresight. Their resilience was quiet but profound, shaping not only their own lives but the social and cultural structures of their time. The stories of these hidden lives remind us that history is not only made in grand gestures or public acts. It is also shaped in quiet moments: the decision to speak or remain silent, the careful planning of a day, the maintenance of a home, the nurturing of relationships, and the courage to protect one's own dignity. Women's lives in medieval Europe were deeply constrained, yet within those constraints, subtle acts of defiance, endurance, and hope thrived. In the hidden corners of history, we find courage that transcends time. Quiet, persistent, and deeply human. Women learned that agency could exist even under constraint, that hope could survive even in secrecy, and that dignity could be preserved despite judgment.
These hidden lives, though often invisible to chroniclers, were the lifeblood of communities, the quiet force shaping social structures, and the enduring testament of resilience in the face of adversity. In medieval Europe, marriage was not merely a personal choice, it was a social contract, a measure of honor, and often a path to stability. For women who had faced hardship, social judgment, or the emotional strain of broken promises, marriage carried layers of significance far beyond affection. It could be a source of protection, a pathway to recovery, and a means to rebuild reputation. Yet it was always intertwined with societal consequence. A woman's approach to marriage after hardship required careful consideration. Her family, concerned with both honor and practical survival, often played a decisive role in arranging or approving unions. Even when a woman desired autonomy, her choices were guided by expectations, advice, and caution. She had to weigh affection against perception, personal preference against family strategy, and hope against the ever-present potential for judgment. The community's perception remained a powerful influence. A woman's prior experiences, however discreet, could affect the willingness of prospective partners and their families to enter into marriage. Whispered tales and subtle reputation shifts could create hesitation, requiring women to demonstrate dignity, resilience, and prudence in every interaction. Patience, discretion, and measured behavior became essential tools in navigating the path toward marriage. Marriage, in this context, often became an instrument of social rebuilding. A well-chosen union could restore reputation, integrate a woman fully into community life, and create stability for herself and any children she might have. It offered protection against the vulnerability of isolation and the judgment of neighbors, and it provided a framework within which she could pursue economic and social security. In many ways, marriage became both a shield and a platform, allowing women to regain standing and move forward with dignity. The practical aspects of marriage were carefully considered. Dowries, household management, and social alliances required negotiation, often guided by family elders or trusted advisors. Women learned to navigate these arrangements with strategic insight, balancing personal desires with broader expectations. They discovered that marriage could be both a responsibility and a form of empowerment, offering a structured environment in which to exercise agency, build networks, and contribute meaningfully to household and community life. Emotional resilience remained central throughout this process. Women carried past experiences, loss, abandonment, and social scrutiny into their new roles. Yet these experiences often strengthened their capacity for patience, understanding, and careful judgment. A woman who had endured hardship brought insight into relationships, empathy for others, and an ability to navigate conflict with measured calm. These qualities, forged in adversity, became invaluable in managing both domestic responsibilities and social expectations. Marriage also offered the opportunity to redefine identity. Within a new household, a woman could demonstrate competence, cultivate relationships, and restore social credibility. She might oversee domestic operations, manage finances, or mentor younger women in the household. These responsibilities, though demanding, provided avenues for influence and recognition. Even when constrained by societal norms, women exercised agency by shaping their homes, guiding families, and navigating social networks with care and intention. For noble women, the stakes were higher, but the principles similar. Alliances formed through marriage had implications for inheritance, power, and family reputation. A woman who had faced scandal or hardship could, through careful planning and familial support, enter a marriage that restored social standing and contributed to long-term strategic goals. Her ability to demonstrate resilience, discretion, and competence was critical in securing her place within both family and society. For peasant or merchant communities, marriage offered a different but equally significant form of rebuilding. It could provide economic security, labor support, and social integration. Through careful selection, negotiation, and the cultivation of trust, women created partnerships that allowed them to thrive despite prior challenges. Marriage became a practical solution, a source of stability, and a means to reestablish social credibility. Rebuilding through marriage also depended on the ability to maintain discretion and patience. Past experiences might require women to be cautious in their interactions, to observe social cues closely, and to act with foresight. Every step, from courtship to household management, was an exercise in careful navigation, balancing personal needs against societal expectations. Women honed these skills over time, learning to blend prudence, resilience, and strategic thinking in ways that ensured their continued dignity. Yet marriage was not only about survival or social restoration, it also allowed women to cultivate a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. Within the household, they could nurture relationships, provide guidance, and create stability for future generations. Their influence, though often unrecorded in official chronicles, shaped family culture, values, and daily life. In this way, marriage became both a practical necessity and a venue for quiet empowerment. Emotional intelligence played a central role in rebuilding through marriage. Women drew on lessons learned from past experiences, managing disappointment, navigating social pressures, and responding to adversity with resilience. They developed empathy, patience, and foresight, all of which became crucial in fostering stable, enduring partnerships. Marriage offered a framework within which these skills could be applied, enhancing both personal fulfillment and social standing. The broader community often observed these transitions carefully. How a woman conducted herself in courtship, negotiation, and household management could influence perception, gossip, and reputation. Success in these areas reinforced social credibility, demonstrating that she had navigated hardship with dignity.
Failure, in contrast, risked renewed scrutiny or criticism. Women learned to manage these perceptions with subtlety, cultivating patience, discretion, and measured behavior in every aspect of life. Over time, women who rebuilt through marriage often emerged stronger and more self-assured. They'd survived judgment, loss, and adversity, and their experiences endowed them with wisdom, resilience, and perspective. Their households became centers of stability, their influence extended quietly into communities, and their stories, though rarely celebrated, left enduring traces in the social fabric of medieval Europe.
Marriage, consequence, and social rebuilding were therefore inseparable. Each step a woman took toward union was informed by prior hardship, guided by community expectation, and tempered by personal resilience. It was a careful negotiation between desire, necessity, and social survival, one that required courage, insight, and patience. In successfully navigating this path, women demonstrated remarkable strength, adapting to circumstances, reclaiming dignity, and creating new opportunities for themselves and those around them. Tonight, as we imagine the quiet streets, stone cottages, and modest manor houses of medieval Europe, we can picture women taking careful steps toward renewed life. Each conversation, each domestic task, each strategic choice reflects courage, wisdom, and resilience. Through marriage, they rebuilt not only social standing, but also personal identity, crafting futures that reflected both prudence and hope. Even in a society that imposed strict rules and relentless scrutiny, women discovered ways to reclaim dignity, navigate consequence, and construct meaningful lives. Their endurance reminds us that strength is often measured in quiet decisions, sustained effort, and patient action. Marriage was not merely a social contract. It was a bridge between hardship and hope, a framework within which women could exercise agency, demonstrate resilience, and restore both honor and stability. In the hidden, measured steps of their lives, we see the quiet power of medieval women. Through thoughtful choices, strategic alliances, and enduring patience, they navigated adversity, rebuilt their worlds, and shaped history in ways that, though subtle, were no less profound. In medieval Europe, the roles of women extended far beyond the personal and immediate. Beyond navigating social expectations, rebuilding lives after hardship, and maintaining dignity under scrutiny, many women became pillars of guidance, teaching the next generation the skills, resilience, and patience required to survive in a demanding world. Motherhood, mentorship, and quiet leadership were the ways in which their strength was preserved and extended, subtly shaping communities for decades to come. Motherhood was, for many women, both a responsibility and a calling. Caring for children required patience, careful planning, and an understanding of both the practical and emotional demands of life. In addition to providing nourishment, shelter, and protection, mothers taught the values of resilience, careful judgment, and social awareness. They were often the first educators, instilling lessons that would guide children through a world filled with both opportunity and risk. Through daily routines, tending the hearth, preparing meals, managing chores, and guiding play, mothers imparted more than skill. They modeled endurance, fortitude, and quiet wisdom. Mentorship extended beyond biological children. Young girls, nieces, wards, and even neighbors often relied on the guidance of older women. In households and communities, seasoned women provided counsel on personal conduct, social strategy, and practical skills. They taught how to navigate complex relationships, maintain dignity under scrutiny, and respond to challenges with discretion. These lessons, transmitted quietly yet deliberately, were crucial for survival in a society that measured women by virtue, reputation, and adaptability. Guidance often took subtle forms. Through stories, parables, and practical demonstration, women conveyed strategies for coping with hardship.
A simple act of household management might illustrate foresight and patience. A gentle conversation about a social faux pas might teach prudence and measured judgment. By observing their mentors, young women learn to balance personal desires with societal expectation, to exercise discretion without sacrificing dignity, and to cultivate both resilience and compassion. Communities were strengthened through these practices. Women who had endured personal challenges, loss, abandonment, or social judgment were uniquely equipped to teach others how to face adversity. Their experience became a living repository of knowledge, offering practical guidance on navigating social hierarchies, resolving conflicts, and managing relationships with tact. In villages, towns, and noble households alike, this knowledge circulated quietly, shaping behavior, expectations, and the values of multiple generations. The influence of mentorship extended into emotional development. Women provided reassurance, empathy, and moral guidance, helping younger women manage fear, disappointment, and uncertainty. These lessons fostered inner strength, enabling young women to navigate societal pressures while maintaining dignity and agency. Emotional resilience, once cultivated, became an invaluable tool for survival, allowing them to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively to the challenges they faced. In addition to mentorship, women shaped communities through practical leadership. Managing households, supervising labor, organizing events, and coordinating charitable acts all required skill, foresight, and diplomacy. These responsibilities allowed women to exercise agency in structured ways, demonstrating competence and influence within socially accepted boundaries. Their work, though often overlooked in formal historical accounts, was critical to maintaining the stability, productivity, and cohesion of medieval communities. Motherhood and mentorship were also acts of preservation. By guiding the next generation, women ensured that knowledge, values, and social skills survived. They created continuity in culture and community, passing down lessons on virtue, prudence, resilience, and compassion. Each household managed with care, each lesson imparted, and each example of quiet strength reinforced social structures and enabled future women to navigate life with greater confidence and awareness. Resilience was taught not only through instruction, but also through example. Women who had faced hardship, broken promises, social judgment, or personal loss demonstrated the power of endurance. By modeling patience, discretion, and strategic thinking, they provided tangible proof that strength could be cultivated through experience. Their lives became living textbooks, offering lessons on how to adapt, survive, and thrive even under challenging circumstances. Spiritual guidance often intertwined with practical mentorship. Women taught younger generations about prayer, reflection, and moral responsibility, illustrating how faith could provide both solace and direction. They demonstrated how religious practice could serve as a framework for ethical behavior, emotional stability, and community engagement. Through these lessons, women equipped the next generation with tools to navigate not only daily life, but also moral and spiritual challenges, balancing obedience, hope, and personal integrity. The impact of these efforts was profound. Young women who received mentorship learned to navigate their environment with awareness and discretion. They gained the ability to make thoughtful choices, manage relationships with care, and respond to challenges with patience and resilience. These qualities, cultivated quietly and often behind closed doors, prepared them to maintain dignity and agency in a society that offered few guarantees of security or recognition. Motherhood and mentorship also created networks of solidarity. Women guided one another, supported each other in times of difficulty, and shared wisdom that reinforced communal strength. Through these networks, advice, protection, and resources circulated quietly, creating layers of social resilience. Women became both students and teachers of survival,
passing forward knowledge that had been honed through personal experience and communal observation.
In imagining these households and communities, one might picture a mother kneeling to braid her child's hair, a woman quietly instructing a niece in the art of maintaining composure during a social visit, or a senior member of the household guiding the management of finances and labor. These scenes, though ordinary, carried extraordinary significance. They represent the transmission of resilience, the cultivation of wisdom, and the quiet exercise of influence that shaped both individual lives and the broader social fabric. Even in moments of hardship, women maintained the capacity to nurture. They offered encouragement, practical guidance, and emotional support, creating a ripple effect that strengthened families, households, and communities. Through their mentorship, the next generation gained the skills, knowledge, and confidence needed to navigate the pressures of medieval life with dignity. Ultimately, motherhood and mentorship exemplified the continuity of strength. Women transformed personal endurance into communal legacy, teaching lessons of courage, patience, and strategic thought. Their quiet labor, emotional, practical, and spiritual, created continuity, preserved knowledge, and ensured that future generations were equipped to meet the challenges of their world. Tonight, as we picture the soft candlelight in a quiet household, the gentle murmur of instruction, and the rhythmic tasks of daily life, we can sense the enduring power of these women. Through motherhood and mentorship, they shaped more than individual lives, they shaped society itself. In each act of guidance, each lesson imparted, and each example of resilience, they preserved dignity, nurtured hope, and extended strength across generations. Their legacy reminds us that influence need not be public to be profound. Quiet guidance, patient instruction, and enduring support were forms of power in themselves, subtle, persistent, and transformative. Women who embraced these roles became anchors for families, models for communities, and bearers of resilience that quietly carried through centuries. Even centuries later, we can hear the echoes of their wisdom. The lessons they imparted, the strength they nurtured, and the courage they inspired. Motherhood and mentorship were not merely roles, they were acts of enduring significance, shaping the lives of individuals and the course of history itself, one quiet, deliberate, and courageous act at a time. In the quiet corridors of history, much is left unspoken. The lives of women in medieval Europe were often overlooked, their endurance unrecorded, and their influence understated. Yet, if we pause and look closely, we can trace their impact in the stability of households, the strength of communities, and the continuity of family, culture, and values. The legacy of these women is woven into the fabric of daily life, revealing lessons of resilience, courage, and quiet agency that extend far beyond their time. Legacy often began at home. The knowledge, discipline, and values that women imparted to their children shaped generations. Through daily routines, mothers taught responsibility, patience, and strategic thinking. Children observed how their mothers navigated adversity, managed households, and balanced social expectations with personal dignity. These lessons, often subtle and unspoken, created enduring patterns of behavior and social competence. The practical wisdom of women became a cornerstone for the families they nurtured, influencing decisions, relationships, and even local politics long after their direct guidance ended. Beyond individual households, memory extended to communities. Women who endured hardship, loss, abandonment, social judgment, left an imprint on the neighborhoods, villages, and towns in which they lived. Their ability to maintain dignity under scrutiny, rebuild their lives, and support others created models of behavior that were observed and emulated. Younger women learned from their example. Neighbors grew to respect their perseverance, and communal norms were subtly shaped by the quiet actions of those who had faced difficulty with courage. In some cases, women's influence extended into formal structures. Within households, noble or wealthy women oversaw estates, organized labor, and made decisions affecting both family and community. Their judgment guided economic stability, social alliances, and even local politics. These responsibilities required skill, foresight, and calm decisiveness, qualities honed through personal experience
and the navigation of societal pressures. Even when unrecorded in official histories, these acts had tangible effects on the functioning and prosperity of communities. Memory was preserved in stories, lessons, and traditions. Families passed down accounts of women who had endured hardship, demonstrating resourcefulness, empathy, and patience. These tales of quiet courage, surviving abandonment, managing households, mentoring younger generations became part of the oral history of villages and towns. These narratives reinforced values, offered guidance, and provided emotional continuity, reminding each new generation that resilience was possible even under challenging circumstances. Legacy also lived through mentorship. Women guided younger relatives, neighbors, and apprentices in practical skills, social conduct, and moral decision-making. These acts of teaching created continuity, ensuring that knowledge accumulated through experience was not lost. Through mentorship, knowledge of household management, social negotiation, and emotional resilience was transmitted, extending influence beyond a single lifetime. Women's careful guidance nurtured competence and confidence, preparing successors to navigate the same complex society with greater assurance. Faith, too, contributed to legacy. Women's religious practice, prayer, reflection, and adherence to moral and social guidelines shaped the spiritual lives of their families and communities. They modeled devotion, ethical conduct, and service, demonstrating that resilience encompassed both worldly and spiritual dimensions. Through their example, subsequent generations internalized lessons about responsibility, morality, and the capacity to endure difficulty with dignity. Even in the context of hardship, legacy was about subtlety. Women often shaped the world quietly, without seeking recognition or reward. Their influence manifested in small, repeated actions, careful management of the household, measured responses to social challenges, patient guidance of children, and deliberate cultivation of reputation. These acts, though understated, created lasting effects. They preserved continuity, nurtured stability, and demonstrated the profound power of perseverance and thoughtful action. Communities remembered through observation and example. A woman's careful handling of social pressures, her strategic decision-making, and her acts of quiet support were all noticed, sometimes without conscious awareness. Her resilience provided a template for others to follow, reinforcing social cohesion and offering practical guidance for managing life's uncertainties. Memory, in this sense, was living and participatory, carried forward by those who observed, learned, and adapted.
Legacy was not always about success in the public or material sense. Sometimes it was measured by endurance, by the ability to preserve dignity, protect family, and navigate adversity without compromising core values. Even when societal recognition was absent, the impact of a woman's life resonated in the habits, decisions, and ethical frameworks of those who came after her. Strength, once embodied, became contagious, quietly shaping future generations and communities alike. Reflection upon these lives reveals lessons for the future. Resilience, discretion, patience, and strategic thinking are timeless qualities. The ability to endure hardship with dignity, to rebuild after loss, and to guide others with empathy and wisdom remains relevant across cultures and centuries. Women of the medieval period demonstrated that influence need not be loud or celebrated to be profound. Quiet, consistent acts of care, judgment, and guidance can shape families, communities, and societies in ways that endure long after the moment has passed. Memory and legacy were reinforced by ritual and tradition. Religious observances, household routines, and communal events served as anchors for continuity, linking the past to the present. By participating in these structures, women preserved cultural norms, transmitted knowledge, and modeled resilience. Their lives were intertwined with the rhythms of daily life, and their influence was embedded in the predictable cycles of work, worship, and social interaction. The endurance of legacy is perhaps most apparent in the values passed through generations. Prudence, patience, empathy, and courage, learned through observation, instruction, and personal example, became ingrained in the communities these women nurtured. These qualities shaped behavior, guided decision-making, and created a foundation of social stability. In this way, legacy was both tangible and intangible, rooted in daily practice, yet extending far beyond it. As we imagine the villages, towns, and households of medieval Europe, we can picture women performing their daily tasks with care, teaching quietly, guiding compassionately, and navigating social pressures with discretion. Every small action, from preparing a meal to advising a younger woman, carried meaning. These cumulative acts of strength, wisdom, and patience formed a legacy that endured across generations. Legacy, memory, and lessons for the future are inseparable. The lives of medieval women, shaped by hardship, resilience, and quiet courage, left imprints on families, communities, and society at large. Their stories remind us that human strength is often most evident in the uncelebrated moments, in patience, guidance, and thoughtful action. They demonstrate that influence can be subtle yet enduring, shaping the world long after the immediate pressures have passed. Tonight, as we picture the quiet evenings, candlelit rooms, and rhythmic routines of the past, we can sense the continuation of strength. Through their work, mentorship, faith, and resilience, medieval women created ripples that reached far beyond their own lives. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring power of quiet courage, measured wisdom, and the patient cultivation of human potential. In the end, the lessons they imparted about perseverance, dignity, and the subtle power of careful action continue to resonate. They remind us that history is not only shaped by grand events or public acts, but also by the daily, persistent, and thoughtful contributions of those who live with courage, compassion, and foresight. The legacy of medieval women, though often hidden, endures as a quiet, unwavering light illuminating the path for generations to come. As we reach the final chapter of this journey through the lives of medieval women, it is worth pausing to reflect on what these stories tell us about human resilience, courage, and quiet strength. Throughout history, women faced an intricate web of societal expectations, familial pressures, and personal trials. Love, hardship, abandonment, and social judgment were constants in their lives. Yet within these challenges, they found ways to endure, adapt, and thrive. Their experiences were both deeply personal and profoundly universal, revealing the enduring spirit of human perseverance. From the earliest chapters of their lives, women were taught that their choices were shaped not only by desire, but by duty. They navigated family obligations, social hierarchies, and religious expectations with care and caution. Every decision carried consequence, and every action was observed, whispered about, or remembered. Yet within these constraints, women exercised agency in ways that were subtle but transformative. Their quiet acts of resilience, enduring loss, managing households, mentoring younger generations, and maintaining dignity under scrutiny shaped not only their own destinies, but the very communities they inhabited. One of the most remarkable aspects of their lives was the ability to transform adversity into strength. Experiences of abandonment, social judgment, or hardship did not define the entirety of their existence. Instead, these challenges became opportunities to cultivate patience, discretion, and foresight. Women learned to navigate complex social landscapes, to find sanctuary in both physical spaces and emotional practices, and to exercise judgment that balanced personal needs with societal expectations. Their endurance was a daily act of courage, repeated in small, deliberate steps that often went unnoticed but left lasting impressions. The role of mentorship and guidance cannot be overstated.
Through quiet instruction, demonstration, and example, older women nurtured the next generation, passing on the wisdom gleaned from years of experience. Lessons about practical skills, social navigation, moral integrity, and emotional resilience were imparted subtly, often in the rhythm of daily life, while tending a hearth, managing household affairs, or overseeing labor. These acts ensured continuity, preserving knowledge, values, and resilience across generations. In this way, the lives of medieval women became threads in a broader social tapestry, linking past, present, and future through shared experience and enduring wisdom. Faith, too, played a crucial role in shaping resilience. Religious structures, practices, and moral guidance offered women both framework and solace. Confession, penance, and reflection provided a means to reconcile personal choices with societal and spiritual expectations. Prayer and devotion created spaces of introspection and renewal, allowing women to process grief, find guidance, and regain dignity after hardship. Faith offered structure and hope in a world often unpredictable and unforgiving, and it reinforced values of perseverance, morality, and quiet fortitude.
Marriage, social reintegration, and the management of reputation were central themes in their lives. Women learned to rebuild themselves, carefully navigating choices that influenced their standing, security, and legacy. Marriage, while socially regulated, offered opportunities to reclaim dignity, establish stability, and exercise agency within the household and community. Each decision was a delicate balance of personal desire, practical necessity, and societal expectation. In these acts, we see the interplay of caution and courage, prudence and determination, shaping lives in ways both visible and subtle. Motherhood and mentorship extended influence beyond the individual, creating continuity in communal strength. Women nurtured not only children, but entire social networks, imparting lessons of endurance, dignity, and strategic thought. Through quiet guidance, they prepared future generations to navigate challenges with wisdom and resilience. The impact of these efforts, though rarely recorded in formal chronicles, was profound, shaping communities, preserving knowledge, and cultivating a culture of measured, enduring strength. Perhaps the most striking lesson of these lives is the power of quiet courage. The strength of medieval women was rarely dramatic or celebrated in the public record. It was often found in the rhythm of daily life, in measured responses, careful choices, acts of service, and the perseverance to continue despite social judgment or personal loss. Their power was not defined by visibility, but by consistency, dignity, and the ability to adapt and endure. Even in adversity, they carved spaces of agency, nurtured hope, and left legacies that persisted far beyond their own time. As we reflect on these stories, it is clear that endurance, resilience, and agency are timeless qualities. The experiences of medieval women, while shaped by their historical context, offer lessons that resonate today. The importance of patience, the value of discretion, the strength found in adaptation, and the quiet power of mentoring and guidance. These women remind us that influence is often subtle, that courage can be measured in everyday acts, and that dignity is preserved not in defiance alone, but in thoughtful navigation of life's challenges. Their stories also encourage empathy and reflection. By imagining their worlds, the daily tasks, whispered counsel, measured steps, and private acts of care, we gain insight into the human capacity for endurance. We understand that strength is not always public or dramatic. It is often private, cultivated through consistent effort, mindful action, and quiet perseverance. The endurance of medieval women teaches us to value subtle acts of courage,
to recognize the impact of guidance and mentorship and to appreciate the resilience that sustains life through adversity. In a sense, the legacy of these women continues in every household, community, and family, where lessons of resilience, discretion, and care are passed down. It is present in the quiet guidance of mothers, mentors, and elders. It is found in the structures of community support, the rhythms of daily life, and the continuity of moral and practical wisdom across generations. Their influence, though often unseen, is enduring, shaping human experience in ways that are both profound and lasting. As we bring this journey to a close, we are reminded that history is not only recorded in monumental events, official chronicles, or public recognition. History also lives in the quiet endurance of those who navigate life with integrity, patience, and thoughtful action. The women of medieval Europe, through their resilience, mentorship, and quiet courage, exemplify this truth. They demonstrate that even under constraint, even amid adversity, human strength can flourish, and legacies of wisdom and fortitude can persist. Tonight, as we imagine the flickering candlelight in stone cottages, the soft murmur of prayers in distant chapels, and the gentle rhythm of daily life, we can feel the enduring spirit of these women. Their courage, dignity, and resilience echo across time, reminding us that strength often resides in patience, perseverance, and the careful, thoughtful shaping of life. Their stories are not only a window into the past, but also a mirror reflecting the timeless qualities of endurance and human spirit. The enduring lesson is simple yet profound. Life, even when constrained, uncertain, or filled with challenges, can be navigated with grace, courage, and quiet determination. Women of the medieval era teach us that dignity is preserved through thoughtful action, hope can be nurtured even in adversity, and influence is often quiet but deeply transformative. Their spirit is one of resilience, measured, patient, and enduring, and it continues to inspire those who take the time to reflect on the quiet power of human endurance. In closing, the story of medieval women is the story of the human spirit itself. It is a tale of navigating hardship with patience, exercising agency within constraint, and shaping lives through quiet, persistent effort. Their endurance, mentorship, and courage remind us that even in a world dominated by strict rules and scrutiny, strength can flourish in subtle, profound ways. Their legacy endures in families, communities, and the echoes of history as a testament to the enduring spirit of women who lived, loved, and persevered with remarkable grace.